Hallo, hallo, og velkommen til webinar. Håper alle har det bra. Jeg skal starte 2-3 slides med PowerPoint her, men viste først noen artikler som har kommet ut, som er veldig relevante for tematikken i dag. I dag så fikk vi en mail fra NCSC, som er NorCERT sitt National Cybersecurity Center, som informerer om sårbarheter i et vidt spekter av nettverksbiblioteker. Det er sårbarheter på TCP/IP-stacken, som benyttes, den stacken her, kalles Ripple 20. Den innebygger lavnivåbibliotek som brukes til TCP/IP-kommunikasjon fra et selskap kalt Trek. Det er 19 sårbarheter, og 4 av dem er kritiske. Det som er spesielt med den her, er at den TCP/IP-stacken her brukes veldig ofte av IoT-utstyr. Her står det blant annet av HP, Intel, Rockwell, Schneider. I artikkelen til venstre her så står det i tillegg Caterpillar, Baxter og andre. Så den her kom i dag, og i dag skal vi snakke om IoT-sikkerhet, så dette her er høyst relevant. Så søk opp litt på Ripple 20, så finner dere mer informasjon. So I switched to English there, and Ed, I just introduced with the Ripple 20. Have you heard about that today, Ed?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I found it curious that you posted it. I was, oh, look at that.
Yeah, it's quite relevant to this webinar, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah. So a quick intro here. My name is Untitled. I work for Data Equipment as a CISO, security guy, talking internally and externally about security in different flavors. My time outside work is on different things, from skiing to cycling to motorcycling and other things. But security is a generic thing I have as a hobby. And I have a motto that we all have to remember that successful attacks occurs in allowed traffic. We have to reduce the attack surface, and we have to have focus on that. And this is also very relevant to today's topic on IoT security. Take control on other IoT gear, what is to be allowed on communication to and from, and identify vulnerable things going on there. Ask question during the webinar in the Q&A part of the Zoom tool, and I will follow them, and I can ask the questions to Ed later here. So, quick intro of Ed. I typically give the word to Ed so he can present himself, but you yourself typically don't mention apples when you present yourself, do you?
No, I don't, but I am an apple farmer, yes. Something I really do enjoy, too.
That's really cool. So, I'll leave it to you then, Bob, Ed.
Thank you.
Look, I looked at your bobcat and I said, Bob.
Absolutely. So I too, cybersecurity is a hobby of mine. So I am an ethical hacker. I remember my first time when I penetrated something that they said was secure back in 1989, and after that I was hooked. So it is a hobby of mine. I do have labs here at my own residence, and then obviously we do quite a bit at Extreme. We're going to talk about IoT because we have done quite a bit of research in this area, and while some folks may think this is a very daunting challenge, it really isn't as bad as what we might think. So if Goran, you can move me over to my presentations, or do we want to ask the poll questions? There were 3 poll questions that I wanted to.
It was 3 poll questions. Let me put them out here.
Yeah. There we go. Just trying to get a sense of where everyone is at from an audience perspective.
And question 1 is IoT ICS. I mean, what is an IoT? That's something you're going to talk about later, of course, but We know that some say that we don't have any IoTs in our network. I guess you've heard that before, Ed.
Absolutely. That's one of the things. Some people think they have a clear definition of what it is in their head. Other people don't. And this is kind of measuring where we're at.
Exactly.
And ICS stands for Industrial Control Systems or Operational Technologies, which you may not have, but certain production and manufacturing obviously would.
Yeah. Yeah, and that we also see that what I know you're going to talk about today is one of the things is segmentation, segment these things out of the normal network.
Yes.
Visited customers where the ICS network is part of the office network.
Dangerous, dangerous.
Yeah. Okay, seems like we've got quite some answers here. I'll just, oh, there is some questions still answered. Yeah, so I'll end the poll there and I can share the results.
Well, there we go. Okay. Okay.
So 69% says yes. One person says no IoT in this network. So that's
possible. That's
IoT,
possible.
It's
May
IoT
change. Maybe they'll change their mind after the presentation and say, "Well, maybe I do have it." So yes. Okay. Yeah. Good. 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 Do you properly segment? 69% says yes. That's a great thing. Do you perform risk assessments? Half said yes. That's good. That's good. That's good. That's actually higher than when I asked these same questions in Southern California. As a matter of fact, the risk assessment thing was almost no one did it. So this is good. Good. Excellent. Excellent.
Good.
Okay. Can everyone see my slides?
I can see it at least. So
okay. Excellent. Excellent. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take a little review of this. Again, there's been a common theme around zero trust for this whole thing, and obviously around 2020. So what I'd like to do is start out with a fairly straightforward agenda, as always. We're going to basically talk about the IoT security threat. You know, what is IoT? It actually has very, very surprising varieties. We'll talk about the difference between IoT and ICS because many people wonder, you know, what is that? You know, what's the difference? Then obviously we'll talk about managing the risk. As we said in the title of the webinar, it's not as hard as you might think, and it really isn't. There's a lot of things about the IoT and ICS environment that do lend itself to very good tractable security practices, one of which is visibility and control. And I will actually put a spotlight on a product solution set here. I normally don't do that, but I think in this instance, this is called for. So there will be a little bit that we will talk about for Extreme Defender for IoT. So the rapid adoption of IoT is no real question. As a matter of fact, the number now is more than doubled. We are now close to 50 billion IoT devices. But note the context of semantic, that, you know, internet attacks have increased 600%, and that was just between 2016 and 2017. That has increased as well. We are now getting to the point where people have many, many endpoints, a tablet, a phone, some people have two phones, multiple PCs. This is creating an issue where we're getting to the point where, you know, there's almost 10 times as many devices as there are actually humans on the internet. Many of these devices are also connected through Wi-Fi, so that's another thing that we have to consider as well. So we have to look at wireless vulnerabilities in context, particularly when you're looking at IoT with wireless. Many organizations consequently feel vulnerable. 81% of people polled, and this, by the way, was done by Ponemon, is basically saying that they believe they will experience some sort of breach within the next 24 months on an IoT device. Again, this is rather dated, and it's the reason why I'm using dated information is because they were right. This is validated information. That's important. 97% said an IoT attack could be catastrophic. I'm not going to mention a couple different entities, but IoT was the root cause of the initial infraction into the network and penetration. And 60% of their businesses said IoT ecosystems are vulnerable to a ransomware attack. And again, that was prophetic, because I'm going to talk about some trends. Actually, we talked about it on the last video that we did for ransomware. So you're going to kind of see a little bit of a tie-in here, because all three webinars are actually going to kind of wrap up in a cumulative story that I hope becomes very consistent across the board. Now, the threats are real. This is a real example. There was a Las Vegas casino that had a very large aquarium. You know, you could imagine a casino, it probably was, 40 feet long, and you had all sorts of exotic fish. Well, they needed to monitor the system, so fairly innocent. You think this is okay, no problem. Well, actually, the system had a Linux backend, so someone used the fish tank to get into the network, and they used it as a pivot point. Once they got into there, they moved laterally and eventually got into the high roller databases and the personal information of the casino. So this is a great example of how an actual orchestrated attack could occur. But there, this is the case of where, you have some thieves that are basically doing an active hack, as it were. But there are other things that we need to worry about, and that is the use of IoT and ransomware. And this is a funny slide. I bring this in every now and then because there are some things. I particularly like the concept of send me $25 or I'll tell everyone on your social network that you were stupid enough to buy an internet connected broom. So that's kind of funny. But I like also the fact that, you're being held hostage if you don't pay up, or, things are going to happen bad. And this is, kind of humorous. It really is. But this has a serious note, as Symantec notes. And we also have to realize that it's not a joke. Mirai is a great example, and WannaCry is a great example. It's kind of become an unholy marriage, if you will. But Mirai isn't the only botnet that you need to worry about. Mirai and WannaCry is not the only ransomware. So really, when we look at it, Mirai is evolving, and botnets are evolving. Nation states are starting to enter the picture. Criminal cartels are starting to enter the picture. New exploits being brought in, total to 27. Ransomware is among them. We talked about this. And then also new propagation and obfuscation methods. Take note of Unit 42. This is a trend that they're seeing increase. The level of capabilities and the ability to morph, these botnets are becoming extremely dangerous. And keep in mind that most IoT systems have some form of Linux, and typically a shimmed Linux, so it's a very thin form of Linux that they run on. And so these systems can be very, very vulnerable to this type of an attack. So the numbers kind of speak for themselves. Texas, major hit. Honda has been taken out, literally out of functionality, not only their production, but actually their car dealerships, and they are still trying to pull themselves out of that. We had a customer that was attacked with industrial espionage through ICS systems, and we basically mitigated that. Fortunately, it was not a big event, but nonetheless it occurred. They were able to mitigate it fairly quick. So 34.3 million attacks on IoT in 2019. So big increase. Takes 3 minutes in most instances to hack an IoT device sitting in an open network where access can be gotten. Takes over 6 months to discover the breach. So take these three numbers together and you can see that this is not good. This is not good. This needs to be addressed. So a lot of people think about IoT. We think about Alexa. We think about, maybe a Nest smart thermostat, maybe smart building infrastructure for power. But also IoT falls into the patient area, you know, pacemakers, insulin pumps, things of that nature. And note that there are vulnerabilities in these as well. And if you noted in the release that Goran showed on Ripple 20, an infusion pump was one of the devices that could actually be adjusted. So that could be simple saline solution, that could be blood, that could be morphine or something else where a change in the dose actually could be quite fatal. Specific challenges with securing these type of devices. So we look at this and we say, well, first of all, what is IoT? Well, IoT is basically any device that utilizes the IP protocol and has no human associated with it. Or the human is quite independent of the device. A great example would be a pacemaker or an insulin pump. But it could be a video surveillance camera to a large degree. The only thing we ever do is look at what the camera records or look at what the camera's viewing live. We very seldom deal with the camera direct. Another great example of that is technology that we may have in our automobiles. All sorts of devices. It's not just Alexa. It's not just your personal assistants. This is the definition. And people say, well, where does ICS come in? ICS typically moves into non-IP protocols. And what I mean by that is they're typically using something more SCADA-oriented, something like a Modbus or a BACnet type of connection, which may or not use IP transport. That's a critical difference. Now, we're going to talk about the characteristics between these two domains of interest because they're very interesting from a security perspective. But people look at it and they say, well, the IoT challenge is huge. It's the sheer number and types of devices and the fact that very little embedded security is in any of these devices. Many of them have hard-coded passwords, backdoors, things of that nature, web consoles, often don't even encrypt data, and many times they just don't have the means or the horsepower to do so. So they're very lightweight, they're intended to be more or less throwaway. Consequently, they don't get upgraded. Many IoT devices go in and nobody touches them after that. Very few times do they get patched. And also keep in mind that in the medical arena, it's very, very difficult to go in and patch or upgrade a device because it means complete recertification. And that's something that's very, very difficult to accomplish. IoT devices also many times are outside of the control of IoT. That's why, take note, there was a good portion of you that said you were unsure. And that's good because you should be unsure. And you should actually go out and audit to make sure, because many times people bring in devices, they use them in the network, they are IoT devices, but they don't tell IT about them. Or a department may implement IoT for a particular purpose and kind of do it in a shadow IT type of function, which is always a dangerous thing. So it's always smart to make sure that you have a very good, clean audit of this, and we're going to talk about that. The other challenge is the mobility. Sometimes these devices can be incredibly mobile, particularly wireless. So everyone's probably thinking, well, Ed, you said it doesn't sound as hard as what we think it is, and it is, folks, believe me. There are tractable ways that you can address this, but I just wanted to note the challenges. I also wanted to highlight the risks. We have to realize that this is very critical. You can't just let these devices sit in your environment. Between what Goran showed and what I've shown, I think it's pretty obvious that this is a very, very latent vulnerability in your network, particularly if the IoT or ICS devices are sitting in your user business IT domain. So fortunately, IoT is no different. So we use this slide. I use it in almost every presentation. This is the basics. This is what I call the Zen of security practice, the Zen of zero trust. And the continued vigilance at the end is very, very key, because zero trust means you never trust anybody. You never trust anything. And that is where vigilance comes in. If you're not vigilant, if you're not monitoring, if you're not running the analysis and risk assessments, then in essence, you're not really truly zero trust. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on this. We showed this last time, Gartner's 3 tiers of IoT security, and this is great because Gartner is basically validating what I said 10 years ago. That makes me feel good, guys. Now, first of all, 61% of networking professionals had low to no confidence that they knew every device connected to their network. That needs to change. You really have to have a very contextual asset list of the devices that are in your network. Not only the devices themselves, but what they do and what they're supposed to be doing and who owns them. I mean, just a complete contextual list. Segmentation. Only 5% of IoT devices deployed today are segmented. Now, I'm very happy to say that the percentage in this call was much, much higher. That is good. You folks are making the right step forward because that can really protect you from about 90% of the vulnerabilities that can happen to those devices. Because if they are isolated, then it's very, very difficult for them to either get infected or for them to propagate. And then network analysis. So this really translates into security profiles based on whitelists. And you may ask what a whitelist is. Well, Goran kind of talked about that last session. You know, there's a series of saying, hey, deny this, deny this, deny this, deny this, deny that. That's called a blacklist. A whitelist is something where you say, okay, these are the things you're allowed to do, and you can't do anything else. So it's a deny all except this narrow scope. Guys, that fits very well with IoT and ICS, and we're going to kind of talk about that. Now, we should have a profile, and the profile of the IoT device should show the approved devices and the flows, the normal traffic patterns, and then we want to monitor those with L2 to L7 visibility. Any traffic that doesn't conform to those profiles should be blocked. And it's fairly straightforward, really, when you think about it. The question is how. But here we go. Most IoT is very predictable and consistent in behavioral scope. So I'm giving you 4 different scopes. A typical end-user system. Whitelisting an end-user system is pretty close to impossible because we are very varied. We use our PCs for multiple purposes, multiple locations, wireline, wireless. You know, one day I might be looking at videos and webcasts, and another I may be accessing very sensitive materials with an extreme or an RD purpose. So it's hard to gate something like that. Typical server system, however, web or database, much, much narrower scope. Actually, you can get to some form of whitelisting here. Typical IoT system or a typical ICS system, note the degree of constriction in the scope, the normal range of behaviors of those devices. These devices lend themselves very well to whitelists. And fortunately, whitelists tend to be very short. They tend to be very concise, and they are very, very consistent, particularly with IoT and ICS. When you look at it, a video surveillance camera comes up and it does the same thing 24/7. And that's it. It should never change, and it should never talk to another camera. These are profiles. When you look at an insulin pump, for instance, now it may be very mobile because it's on a cart and it's being moved in the hospital environment, but the insulin pump does the same thing. Day in, day out, 24/7, never changes. Same thing with a PLC on a factory floor, controlling a drive bank. It does the same thing, 24/7. It should really never modify its behavior. This is basically the theory that we based on. So while they're very simple and have little, if any, security measures, they are quite predictable and consistent in the way they behave. We can leverage this. So this really gets to step 1. Educate your staff and users. Be sure they have an understanding of what IoT is, and be sure they understand which systems in their environment qualify as IoT. Many people plug things in, they don't think twice about it. Be sure to include OT, operational technology, or ICS, industrial control, basically the same thing, if you are in production or manufacturing. Okay, so be sure to cover your ICS, do risk assessments, try to normalize those, get the vigilance in. Have a proper asset inventory of all IoT and ICS systems in the environment. assets according to type and operation, understand their normal behavioral scope, because that's going to give you the ability to basically get that vigilance and to maintain some sort of rigid policy for these environments, and then perform risk assessments. This should be done on a regular basis, and I'm going to talk about a few organizations that can help you do that. Segment, proper segmentation, it can really give you protection of up to 90% of the attack scenarios. Very quick here, we had a handout in the first session for Zero Trust with an ebook, top 10 practices. Please reference that. I'm sure you can reach out to Goran or anyone at Data Equipment, and they will give you copies of all the webinar slides that we have given. I'm not going to go into detail here, but I've highlighted the ones that are pertinent to IoT ICS, but keep in mind the other ones, even though they're not emboldened, they're still just as important. Here I go again. Segmentation, segmentation, segmentation. Separate IT from IoT. Also separate ICS from IoT. And actually, you should separate IoT from IoT. So let's say you have a system where you have HVAC, you have video surveillance, you have entry-exit systems for your facility, and then you have some sort of smart power management, smart grid capability. Those all should be on individual segments, and they should not be in the IT business domain, obviously. So keep in mind that you just don't take all of your IoT and lump them into one large segment away and say, okay, I'm done. You need to micro-segment. You also want to have strong access controls to be sure that these devices are where they're supposed to be and have an audit trail so you know where they are. And create a tiered environment, because with a tiered environment, tiered segmentation, you can slow or prevent the propagation of malware. And like I say, that helps reduce the depth of penetration when something does happen, if something does occur. Leveraging industry resources. These are great resources. I bring them up every time, but CI Security, they actually have a practice kit for IoT. I highly recommend it. MITRE Attack Defense Framework, they have a set of practices for industrial control systems. ARMIS also has a handbook. I was going to put the URL here, but it slipped my mind. But ARMIS is basically similar to the JSOF Research Lab. They actually have a practice book for MITRE Attack for industrial control systems. And then just Cloud Security Alliance, I always mention them as well. These are great industry resources, and I'm very pleased to say that I'm seeing more and more usage of these. And actually, there are some very good YouTube videos that talk about how to use both of these frameworks, CI Security and MITRE Attack. I highly recommend doing some research in this area. They're great tools. Learn the things to look out for. Continued vigilance. Don't wait when you see changes in those patterns, because early detection can prevent propagation. Now, here's basically a theory here that I talk about, is where we have separate domains of interest between the IT, the IoT, and ICS. And keep in mind, you may have individual microsegments in each of these domains. But at the higher level, these three domains are separate. But notice common visibility and management. This is something Fabric Connect, which is the fabric technology that I helped to invent, does very, very well. IP is totally virtualized, and transport becomes totally virtualized, which means segmentation becomes very easy. Whitelisting profiles can become very easy. A couple other things beyond microsegmentation is, particularly if the data is going over public area, things of that nature, or remote sites, use encryption whenever possible to protect the data in transit. Monitor the IoT and ICS systems to ensure normal behavior. Now, a lot of people say, well, how do I get an idea what the normal behavior is? Well, actually, there is some methods. I'm going to talk about that now. And I'm also going to talk about a way that you can make the job much easier. In the early days, when I first started doing the R&D before this product I'm going to talk about, which is Defender for IoT, the way we got profiles was we would go into the lab and we would use Wireshark. Wireshark's a great tool. And the filtering capability is very powerful now. You don't filter on the capture. That's an important thing. You filter on the display. And that allows you to basically dissect the communication flow. So there's two areas where you do it. Great example would be a video surveillance camera. You basically sit Wireshark in front of the VMS, video management server system. You just sit another one in front of the camera. You do different captures, and you get different profiles end-to-end across the network. Then you use filtering basically to get a signature of what a normal communication flow would look like. It's a powerful approach. It can work. And with some of our new switches, particularly the ones that can actually do integrated application hosting, we can run Wireshark directly on those switches. So it becomes very easy to put Wireshark in front of a server and then in front of an IoT component. And you can model those things. But let's face it, there's work involved. You have to know how to run Wireshark. You have to have some idea of the protocol structures. You have to know how to read a protocol dissection, and you have to understand the theory of operation. And many times the third party can provide you that information. So you can say, okay, what's the normal port calls? What's the normal application profile? The third party, the vendor of IoT or ICS, should be able to give you a pretty good idea of what you should be looking for. And to a large degree, the profiling validates that. But really, that's a challenge. And when you're dealing like this with a scenario like this, you can't expect someone to go and do this manually. It's just too heavy of a lift. It's not agile enough. So, yes.
Time.
Oh, yes. I'm very, very quick here. So basically, we created something built on with a healthcare customer, several major healthcare customers. Basically, the solution is threefold. There is a cloud appliance. There is the Defender application itself, and then there are adapters. Provides secure onboarding, centralized inventory, and it basically learns. It builds the profile for you. So you run it for however long you feel you need to. At that point, a profile is generated, and from there we can create policy creation. There you can actually identify what normal would look like. So this actually learns and does the profiling for you. At that point, the profile follows. So in the case of mobile equipment, such as an infusion pump, as the device moves from one point to the other, obviously the profiles follow them. And we do provide IPsec. Many people in the United States, the healthcare agencies, they're using the system for remote connectivity for COVID pop-up tents, things of that nature. One of the biggest values to this is it provides a centralized device inventory. So you basically have a single pane of glass that gives you the status of all your IoT devices. We have other solutions. I focused on the IoT security, but we do have a number of other solutions that complement the Wi-Fi security, segmentation, isolation, endpoint security, numerous hackathons without a single breach. Actually, I host those hackathons myself. I always give you the 15 indicators of compromise, the DNS vulnerabilities, and in a wrap-up, keep in mind that AI and ML in IoT, they're new attack vectors. Cloud has always been there. And I want to finalize with just remember, genius is in the specifics. Thank you very much. This is the final session, and I really, really do appreciate it. And I apologize for going a little over.
You know, you have the passion, so it's I know how it is. It's hard to stop. Very good, Ed. And perhaps if we are not going to run the poll again, but if we had run the poll again, perhaps the answers would be different now than it was before the presentation, Ed.
I would hope. But
yeah.
Hopefully you found it useful and educational. Anyone has any questions, reach out to Goran or myself. We're available for anything.
Yeah, and I don't have time for a discussion here apart from one thing. I mean, you mentioned it partly, and I think many people know it, but one of the risks with IoT, of course, is with the Ripple 20, how to patch. First of all, how to know that the technology is vulnerable, how to patch IoT. There is not put in system, so vulnerability.
You're right. That's where you go. That's actually probably the largest challenge is getting these systems patched, because they're going to be different per vendor. So you go to Axis, you go to Pelco, they're going to have different ways to patch. You're going to have different. different practices that you're going to have to understand. Also, you're going to have to watch the CVEs. Again, pay attention to vulnerabilities. Again, JSOF Research Lab, ARMIS, those are 2 research labs where you can get a lot of early insight as far as critical vulnerabilities.
Yep. Good. Then we'll, what happened here? Stop there. We'll stop it there. Just the last slide to inform you about the upcoming webinars we're going to do. We're going to have a Pop Networks user forum next week. We're going to have August 25th, a dedicated email security webinar together with NSM, where they're going to present their new email security recommendations. And for all the webinars we've done, they are recorded and shared on our website under activities. So we'll stop it there. And I say thank you again, Ed, for a great webinar again. So I hope this will open the mindset for our customers out there and take IoT security seriously.
Thanks, Goran. Thank you, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.